To some in Star Wars, Count Dooku is a political idealist, and to others, he's a murderer. But what exactly did the political leader of the Confederacy of Independent Systems actually believe, and what did he want? Believe it or not, his own vision for the Clone Wars and the fate of the galaxy did not end with his own head on the floor of an exploding Providence. So today we're going to go over what we know of the Count's ideology and what he thought would happen after the Clone Wars ended. At least partly because his eyes don't go as yellow as we see with the other Sith, you may sometimes see some fan discussions about how Dooku wasn't actually a Darksider, and he was instead the idealist that Ki-Adi-Mundi talks about in Episode 2. But it's pretty much the point of that line in the movie that the Jedi are wrong and blinded to his true nature, along with many other things. The eye argument, I think, holds particularly little weight. Palpatine's eyes don't get Scythian yellow until the end of Revenge of the Sith, despite having been a practicing Sith for decades. It may, on the other hand, be true that Dooku was an idealist, but a lot of those ideals purely come back to personal power. One of the primary motivating factors in what we know about Dooku's life from the earliest days was betrayal. One of his closest so-called friends during his training at the Jedi Temple was another student named Lorian Nod. After Dooku was taken as apprentice by Master Thame Cerulean, Nod became intrigued by a Sith holocron held within the temple, which Dooku and Nod learned about from Cerulean's journals. Nod decided he wanted to steal the holocron, trying to get Dooku on board, although Dooku refused. Despite Dooku having nothing to do with the theft and even trying to convince Nod to return it, when Oppo Rancisis caught Nod with the holocron, Nod blamed the theft on Dooku. Nod, before the theft, had told Dooku he believed the reason that Dooku didn't want to be part of it wasn't because he thought it was actually wrong, but because of the risk of getting caught, and the idea that that might ruin his image as the perfect little Jedi. The importance of this event in Dooku's life, which occurs in the book Legacy of the Jedi, gets reinforced in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, where Dooku essentially acknowledges Nod's interpretation as being correct, thinking, quote, "He had been angry, certainly, furious that his reputation had been put at risk, and he had been angry at himself for his error in judgment, trusting as an ally one who was in fact an enemy." Image was something which would continue to matter throughout Dooku's life, and it's something which often tied into the theme of betrayal, which came up a lot in Dooku's life on both the giving and receiving end. For more of that, we again just have to look at his head rolling on the floor. I've covered the politics of the CIS, what their goals were, and how they worked as a state in prior videos pretty extensively, but those can't be seen as a reflection of Dooku's own political goals or views. The Revenge of the Sith novelization makes it clear what fate he had in mind for the CIS leadership. In the book, Dooku's view of other beings is broken down into two groups, assets and threats. While the megacorporations making up the CIS were assets in the war currently, neither Palpatine nor himself considered them part of their endgame. Eventually, any power they had would be moved over to the status of a threat, and quote, "Being considered a threat by Count Dooku is a death sentence he plans to pronounce, for example, on his current allies, the heads of the aforementioned Trade Federation, Intergalactic Banking Clan, Techno Union, and Corporate Alliance, and Geonosian Weaponeers. Treachery is the way of the Sith," end quote. Much like these temporary pawns, Dooku wanted to like this video and subscribe for more, but they also all did believe the Republic to be corrupt in some way. Dooku just didn't see the CIS as the solution to that corruption for some pretty specific reasons. When it comes to the Jedi, part of how he thought they had lost their way seems to have been from their allowance of the Senate to become as ineffectual or unjust as it had been, but he kind of also just thought the Jedi should be in charge in the first place. The Darth Plagueis novel has a conversation between Dooku, Sifo Dyas, who's the Jedi who orders the clone army, Qui-Gon, who is Dooku's apprentice at the time, and the civilian alter ego of Darth Plagueis himself, Higo Damask. Damask had taken an interest in Dooku as a Jedi who was restless with his role within the Order and less happy to stay out of the political sphere, noting that rather than wear the more subdued robes of the other Jedi, quote, "Dooku favored cloaks and robes more appropriate to a night at the opera on Coruscant. In addition, he was a candid critic of Supreme Chancellor Darius and the corrupt practices of the Senate," end quote. Dooku was heavily critical of the role of money in politics, but while he criticized Darius and the Senate for fostering an environment which allowed injustice to flourish, that still doesn't quite tell us what he thought the injustices were. He also didn't use his own money to buy some senators after leaving the Order and reclaiming his position of Count of Sereno with all the wealth that goes along with that title, but his ideas of what justice and reform actually look like do deserve a lot more scrutiny. Throughout the prequels, we see the Jedi are definitely worthy of criticism. After all, they're unable to tell that Palpatine is the Sith Lord that they've been searching for, and their own history with Dooku made them defend the ex-Jedi until it was too late, despite open violence occurring in his name, spurred on by Dooku's own speeches. He kicked off the secessionist movement which became the CIS with one particular speech known as the Raxus Address. While we don't have the full text of it, it was described in the HoloNet as being, quote, complete with fiery rhetoric lambasting the Senate and the Jedi Order's complacency in the visible erosion of morals and ideals of the Republic. As you may expect with someone decrying the moral decline of the Republic and the role of wealth in buying up political influence, while actively allying with the megacorporations who were the biggest examples of the actual problems money was causing in that political climate, Dooku's goals did not involve restoring democracy as a representation of the interests of the people. According to Jedi archivist Jocasta Nu, Dooku felt the Jedi shouldn't be serving the interests of politicians, part of a break with the Council that many likened with his own apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn, but rather than the Jedi serving the people and the living force the way that Qui-Gon tried to operate, leaving Shmi and slavery aside, Dooku's version would have seen the Jedi in charge of everything, essentially. His endgame was explicitly the very same New Order we saw under Palpatine, a strong man bending the galaxy to his own will, where corruption ultimately just kind of meant those who wouldn't listen to him and how he wanted things to be specifically. The problem wasn't just that the Jedi were serving, quote, shabby politicians, it's that they weren't actively ruling the galaxy. Separatist forces under his control, especially those led by Grievous, acted with his authority to commit massive atrocities, from the destruction of multiple planets in the core during Operation Dirge's Lance, to the use of weapons like the Dark Reaper and the testing of the Defoliator on the Lurman colony on Meridoon. All of these things were done with his full cooperation, support, authorization, and sometimes even under his own direct orders. But the so-called idealist didn't even plan to actually take responsibility for any of it. According to the plan as Dooku believed it to be, once Obi-Wan and Anakin were on board the Invisible Hand to rescue Palpatine, Dooku would fight the pair and kill Obi-Wan before surrendering to Anakin. He would then be taken into custody by Anakin rather than killed, with Anakin being turned to the dark side by the death of his master and the influence of Palpatine. Hence his surprise when Palpatine orders Anakin to kill him as well. Because he's so associated with the prequel era, it can be hard to picture Dooku with the Empire, but it wasn't like he planned to just go away after the Clone Wars happened. He wasn't setting himself up to fall. He was supposed to remain in captivity while the Republic won the war, and pledge himself to Palpatine's new order when he shockingly learned just how depraved the CIS's military had been, something he would pretend to have been entirely ignorant of, allowing him to maintain the facade of being a political idealist, pointing out the corruption the Empire was now luckily solving, rather than going on as a traitor to the Republic as the Republic morphed into the Empire. And I think this is something you really need to contend with if you do want to point Dooku out as being some kind of honorable person. To claim he was actually the idealist he was painted as, there are basically two scenarios. Either he actively believed in what the CIS or separatist movements in the galaxy were doing, in which case he was basically giving even more power to the corporations whose power in the Senate was one of the biggest signs of the corruption he's supposed to be opposing, a position that I think we can pretty clearly say his relationship with Palpatine makes entirely untenable. Or he didn't think any of that, and he spent years lying about his goals throughout the galaxy in the service of starting the Empire as we know it to have become. At the very best, we already do know he was lying to all of his allies and had betrayed the Jedi without being particularly honest about his convictions, on top of being highly motivated by his personal image and feelings of personal betrayal. When he's briefly considering redemption at the hands of Yoda in Dark Rendezvous, he's quickly snapped out of it by the appearance of Anakin and Obi-Wan on the planet Vijun, where Yoda and Dooku meet. The appearance of Anakin on the planet had been arranged by Palpatine, knowing how this apparent betrayal of Yoda's promise to come alone would impact the now even more committed Darth Tyrannus. The Revenge of the Sith novelization also adds an extra layer onto what Dooku's ideals actually were, and what his hopes for the galaxy were under the Empire that again he had to know was coming. Essentially, the rich aristocrat going on diatribes about moral decay turns out to be a huge space racist. What a surprise! Dooku describes the impending new order as an empire of man. The creation of the CIS out of alien-led groups was, according to him, an intentional move stoking those interspecies divisions to set up the empire to appropriate resources belonging to them for the humans. Dooku even holds some disdain for Anakin's choice to accept a mechanical arm, rather than just learning to fight with one arm as he thinks a gentleman would, calling the choice appalling in the depths of bad taste by essentially infecting himself with machinery. He views Anakin as less than human as a result. With Grievous, he thinks that given Grievous was already subhuman before, the cyborg version was essentially an upgrade. But I think even without the human supremacy elements to his characterization in that particular book, what we consistently see in all of Dooku's appearances, including both Legends and some newer appearances in canon like Tales of the Jedi, is the feeling that those he sees as having a right to power, like himself and even the Jedi, should be exercising that as much as possible, and it's a failure when they don't take that power into their hands. He's technically genuine in seeing himself as acting in the interests of the Republic, but a lot of what he thinks is the interest of the Republic reflects his own aristocratic self-image. The less corrupt Republic he's trying to create is just a more authoritarian version of the Republic, also known as the Empire. That's going to do it for our look at the politics of Count Dooku. Special thanks to the patrons whose names you're seeing on screen for their support, which makes this channel possible, along with you for watching here on YouTube. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more. That really helps get the video out there. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.